10 years ago, I used to visit a prison in upstate New York as part of a program that brought law students and prisoners together for conversation and education. And one of the inmates who attended the sessions of our group was an older gentleman known as Mr. Smalls. And Mr. Smalls always came in his signature gold-framed glasses, and he was a very wise and thoughtful guy, and he was a mentor to other prisoners. He was renowned for his legal knowledge and his willingness to help others. Now, it was always a little strange to me when I was in the prison, which is Greenhaven Prison, that someone his age, who was clearly rehabilitated, should still be behind bars. And I eventually left the program, left school, and I never heard anything about Mr. Smalls after that. But in May of 2020, I came upon Mr. Smalls' obituary. Benjamin Smalls, age 72, had died of coronavirus after the COVID-19 pandemic had swept through the state's prisons. And as I read further details of this story, I became enraged, because it turned out that back in 2018, Mr. Smalls had applied to Governor Andrew Cuomo for executive clemency based on his heart issues and his glaucoma. That application was not acted upon. And when the pandemic hit, posing its greatest threat to the elderly and sick, Mr. Smalls made another emergency clemency application to Governor Cuomo. And again, nothing happened. And the Release Aging People in Prison campaign then got involved. They joined the effort to get Cuomo to release the vulnerable, completely rehabilitated Mr. Smalls. Now, despite these emergency requests, Cuomo did not release Mr. Smalls, and within months, he had caught the illness and died. Now, the story of Mr. Smalls' tragic life and his preventable, unnecessary death is one I think about a lot. And it's one that I'd like every New York City resident, in particular, to know when next month they're asked if they want to elect the man who killed Mr. Smalls as their mayor. Andrew Cuomo is bad, and I think a lot of people know he's bad and know he's had a lot of scandals, but you really don't know the half of it. So Andrew Cuomo resigned in disgrace from New York's governorship in 2021 after the state attorney general released a report concluding that he had sexually harassed nearly a dozen women and even unlawfully retaliated against at least one of the women for making her complaints public. Now, the AG's 165-page report makes for really disturbing reading. It should have ended Cuomo's political career for good. Why would someone who's abused their power like that even ever be entrusted with public office again? Why would even one voter cast a ballot for such a person? These are questions you might ask. But strangely, 4 years later, Andrew Cuomo is not only back, but he's actually leading in the polls for the upcoming New York City Democratic mayoral primary. Many leading Democrats who rightly condemned Cuomo for his disgusting abuses of power while he was in office are actually now staying silent about him. Now, I'm not from New York myself, so I don't actually really know how to understand Cuomo's comeback here. I don't get it. Why do you like this guy? Why is anyone voting for this man? I suppose he has name recognition and he's got a lot of money, and maybe people think that being an asshole makes him a getting shit done kind of a guy. Cuomo is also avoiding any situations where he might be confronted about his record and embarrassed about it, like mayoral forums, other public events. Politico says that Cuomo has now led every poll by wide margins, and many Democrats in the 5 boroughs seem willing to forgive and forget. Now, personally, I find it very hard to forgive and forget, because I hold him responsible for the death of a man I knew. But I suppose this is New York's choice to make. But before they make that choice, let's remind them of just what it is they're forgiving and forgetting. If they're going to decide that Andrew Cuomo should be restored to high office, they should at least recall why he was ousted in the first place. So let's look at the record. Andrew Cuomo abused the office of governor to touch women inappropriately. That is confirmed by numerous testimonies from his victims, by the Attorney General's report, by the Federal Department of Justice. Now, I'm not going to be using terms like allegedly and accuser here, because state investigators actually said they corroborated the claims of 11 women through interviews with 179 witnesses, thousands of documents. Now, former aide Lindsey Boylan, for instance, has explained in detail all of the numerous ways in which Cuomo abused his power. He would, she says, go out of his way to touch me on my lower back, arms, and legs, and would open conversations with crude comments like, let's play strip poker. Boylan became afraid to be alone with him, a fear confirmed when he escalated beyond creepy comments and gestures and kissed her on the lips. Now, Boylan concluded that Cuomo had created a culture within his administration where sexual harassment and bullying is so pervasive that it's not only condoned but expected. And I actually happen to have Lindsey Boylan here to discuss this with us now.
I've always contended that Andrew Cuomo's abuse of women is really symptomatic of his larger abuse of power. And I think his reaction to me telling the truth in my Medium piece about his behavior and the toxic work environment that he harbored is exactly an example of that abuse of power. It doesn't have to be related to sexual harassment. So he employed basically his entire senior staff to come after me, to smear me. He connected his staff to the Time's Up senior staff to try and get them to sign on to not, at the very least, not speaking out on my behalf, which they did not. Since that time, both in and out of office, he's used every state resource he can, including taxpayer-funded legal defense, to continue to harass and retaliate against me and the other women who bravely spoke up, not simply to try to silence us, but to make an example of us. So more women and frankly, more people don't speak up about his many abuses of power, even beyond sexual harassment. So he's weaponized the legal system. He's weaponized taxpayer dollars. He's weaponized every resource he can in order to silence not only his victims, but any of his critics. And I think that who do we know who does that at the federal level? You know, that is why so many of us who know Andrew Cuomo say that he is essentially the same person as Donald Trump and has a real tendency towards fascism and abuses of power that we see right now in D.C.
His top aides actively sought to discredit Boylan and her allegations, disseminating personnel files to reporters that cast Boylan as an underperforming employee, and Cuomo and members of his staff formulated an op-ed attacking Boylan, although ultimately the op-ed was not published. He used intimidation to silence his critics, Boylan says, and if you dared to speak up, you would face consequences.
I never had a review working for him. I never had anything of the sort. I have no idea what he's posturing in those things, but I view that as a smear. But either way, he retaliated against me and followed by retaliating against other women for speaking up against him.
Now, Cuomo, even on multiple occasions, sexually harassed an unnamed female state trooper who he'd requested to join his protective detail. And another staffer, Charlotte Bennett, said Cuomo inquired about her sex life, questioning whether she'd had monogamous relationships and if she liked older men. He explained that he was fine with anyone over 22. Now, she was 25 when he said that. And the state of New York ended up having to pay $450,000 to settle a lawsuit by Bennett over Cuomo's conduct. Now, the behavior here was constant, and the Attorney General's report found that each complainant found his conduct to be some combination of humiliating, uncomfortable, offensive, or inappropriate. Anna Rush recalls that Cuomo came up to her at a wedding, put his hands on her, and asked to kiss her. And sometimes he didn't ask. Former Syracuse mayor Stephanie Miner said that not only did Cuomo kiss her in order to exert power, but that was just one of many control tactics he deployed. Cuomo grabbed butts and breasts, he kissed, and he made suggestive remarks. And the Attorney General's report is a detailed, evidence-filled portrait of a man who delighted in getting to push boundaries with women, knowing there was little they could do about it given his immense power. Now, he responded to these women with denial. I never touched anyone inappropriately, he falsely asserted, in the face of photographic evidence to the contrary. The Attorney General's report concluded that Cuomo was lying. We found his denials to lack credibility and to be inconsistent with the weight of the evidence obtained during our investigation. The governor's blanket denials and lack of recollection as to specific incidents stood in stark contrast to the strength, specificity, and corroboration of the complainant's recollections, as well as the reports of many other individuals who offered observations and experiences of the governor's conduct. Now, Cuomo implied that the women had misinterpreted his natural warmth and exuberance. He gave ludicrous excuses, for instance, insisting that he asked Charlotte Bennett about her love life in a misunderstood bid to help her cope with trauma from a past sexual assault. He also claimed the unwanted kissing was because he was Italian-American, an excuse that didn't sit well with one Italian woman he kissed while touring her flood-damaged home. She said family members kiss, strangers do not kiss. But that's how Cuomo treated the women he liked. There was another dimension to Cuomo's abusiveness, his treatment of those he didn't like. Now, Lindsay Boylan says she and other women experienced Cuomo's if he liked you toxicity, but most other people saw the if he hated you toxicity.
You know, you would hear at one point one of his junior staffers who was constantly berated. I was waiting for a meeting with the governor outside of his office, catty corner to the state troopers station outside his office. And he was yelling so loud at this junior staffer that I could hear the walls shake. And it was so loud and so forceful that the state troopers came out of their office to look what was going on. But of course, no one's going to intervene. No one's going to say anything because he's the governor, and the only person that they're there to protect is the governor. But there's another version of that where, let's say you're the former, mayor of Syracuse, when you're in that job and he doesn't like you for whatever reason. Maybe you've made a decision, or you feel he's threatened by your power or your leadership in the city and the party. He would literally steer funding, steer announcements, steer anything related to power or social currency away from you to
Vaccination
really
sites,
everything that you can imagine. He would use against people that he felt were not appropriately supportive of him. If he didn't like your face, if he didn't like something about you, he didn't even have to have a reason. This is a truly petty, cruel person. And I think his sexual harassment are really just two sides of the same coin. That dehumanizing of people, even if he's sexually harassing you, it's a power play. So the same was true for people he didn't like. It was a different version of that power play.
As executive assistant Alyssa McGrath described it, quote, "What makes it so hard to describe every single appropriate incident is the culture of the place. On the one hand, he makes all this inappropriate and creepy behavior normal and like you shouldn't complain. On the other hand, you see people get punished and screamed at if you do anything where you disagree with him or his top aides." Now, the Attorney General's report is worth reading through carefully. Instead of showing true contrition, Cuomo took the Trumpian route of denial. He called it a sham report and asked the state Supreme Court to investigate the Attorney General, claiming she manipulated the investigation to pursue a run for governor. But anyone who reads the report itself can see that this is nonsense. Everything in there is carefully documented with dozens of witnesses who are under oath based on an extensive documentary record. This is a man who consistently took advantage of women and then lied shamelessly about it. Now, the sexual harassment scandal is what finally ended Cuomo's governorship, but he didn't just create a toxic workplace. He also governed incompetently during the most serious crisis of his administration. That's the pandemic. And that incompetence had deadly consequences for New Yorkers, many of whom lost loved ones because of Cuomo's poor governance, which Cuomo has lied about and tried to cover up. And while he was hailed initially for his leadership during the pandemic, it was even touted as a sex symbol in parts of the media, he in fact made catastrophic missteps in responding to the pandemic's early days that seriously worsened the death toll in New York. Cuomo initially said the seasonal flu was a graver worry, and his spokesperson refused to say if the governor had ever read the state's pandemic plan. As the pandemic raged, the state was dealing with $400 million in Medicaid cuts that Cuomo had supported, and it had lost 20,000 of its 73,000 hospital beds due to budget cuts and insurance overhauls. Current mayoral candidate Adrienne Adams recalls, quote, "I remember begging the governor's office to send life-saving vaccines to the community, and for weeks and months our request was denied no matter what we said because the site where the vaccines were supposed to go was run by then Mayor de Blasio, the former governor's political enemy." Now, she's right about that. Indeed, Politico reports that Cuomo personally blocked vaccine distribution to Citi Field, where de Blasio planned to open a mass vaccination site, and his administration withheld daily data from the city. Now, nursing homes in New York were particularly hard hit, with 15,000 people ultimately dying in long-term care facilities in the state. Under Cuomo, however, the state undercounted deaths, with the full total only coming out after he left office. New York had one of the highest per capita death rates in the country. Now, Cuomo made every effort to conceal his pandemic. Incompetence and top aides pushed to hide the number of excess deaths during the early stages of the pandemic, a cover-up that was later admitted by Cuomo's secretary. When a health department report put the death toll roughly 50% higher than the figure being cited publicly by the Cuomo administration, the governor's office staged an extraordinary intervention to get the facts excised. Cuomo himself personally edited the report and then lied about it. And he's now under criminal investigation by the Justice Department, which, unsurprisingly, he insists is politically motivated. Now, Cuomo put pressure on those who brought up the scandal. Assemblymember Ron Kim says the governor threatened to destroy him over Kim's criticism of the nursing home debacle. He called him and went off at Kim about how I hadn't seen his wrath and anger. He would destroy me. That's characteristic behavior, however. New York Magazine reports that when he's criticized, Cuomo's first reaction, often deployed through surrogates or staffers, is to belittle or intimidate. Incredibly, after receiving a flood of campaign donations from nursing home executives, Cuomo signed legislation that shielded those executives from lawsuits stemming from mishandling of coronavirus. Now, the nursing home scandal got more attention than what happened in New York prisons. Throughout the worst months of the pandemic, elderly prisoners and their advocates were pleading with Cuomo to grant emergency clemencies so they could be safe from the virus. Now, these are prisoners with minuscule recidivism rates, almost 0% for those older than 65, according to one estimate. So releasing these elderly prisoners posed little risk to the public. But for months, Cuomo did not respond to their pleas. He did, however, put prisoners to work making hand sanitizer for pennies per hour. Although, according to Vice, prisoners were not exactly making hand sanitizer, but rather doing nothing more than taking existing hand sanitizer and rebottling it into packaging labeled NYS Clean. Now, in a September 2020 report to the state Senate, filled with heartrending testimony from prisoners, Release Aging People in Prison said that despite a huge coalition of advocates pleading for Cuomo to act, he did nothing. Quote, "We worked with advocates across the country, elected officials at all levels of government, philanthropists, district attorneys, and even celebrities to call on Governor Cuomo to grant emergency clemencies to people currently incarcerated in New York State prisons, especially those particularly vulnerable to the virus. We sent the governor's office hundreds of individual requests for clemency and medical parole releases on behalf of some of the state's oldest and sickest people. We received and forwarded to the governor 21 separate appeals from groups of public health experts, U.S. congressional representatives, community, medical, and legal organizations, criminal justice professionals, law enforcement, and faith community leaders, urging him to release vulnerable incarcerated people. Yet Governor Cuomo has only granted 3 clemencies amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, eventually, Cuomo announced a plan to take elderly prisoners from around the state and concentrate them in a special nursing home prison in a remote part of the state, a plan condemned by over 80 social justice organizations who said that the idea runs directly counter to public health, racial justice, and criminal justice evidence, and instead promotes mass incarceration, family separation, racism, and the needless punishment of incarcerated older people. They pointed out that it threatened to replicate the public health crisis experienced in nursing homes across the state, a central lesson of which should have been that it was very dangerous to keep vulnerable older adults in close proximity to one another. But those close to Cuomo were given somewhat different treatment during the pandemic. The Times-Union reported in 2021 that high-level members of the Department of Health were instructed to conduct prioritized coronavirus testing on the governor's relatives, as well as influential people with ties to the administration. And members of Cuomo's family, including his brother, his mother, and at least one of his sisters, were also tested by top health department officials, some several times, with state officials dispatched to their private residences to conduct the testing. Their samples were referred to as critical samples and pushed to the front of the testing line. Now, to help push the narrative of himself as a pandemic hero, Cuomo secured a $5.1 million book deal with Crown to write a self-aggrandizing memoir called With Stunning Arrogance and Irony, American Crisis Leadership Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic, even though one of the main lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic is surely that you do not want Andrew Cuomo in your leadership during a pandemic. You'd think that for the sum of money he received, Cuomo might at least have written the book himself, but no. Cuomo directed state employees to help him with the drafting and editing of the memoir on time paid for by taxpayers. Essentially, New Yorkers paid their own money to make Cuomo rich from his own dishonest spin. Now, the book actually flopped, but Cuomo had already made his millions. It's not dissimilar to what happened with his previous memoir, which also came with a big advance and sold so few copies that Cuomo ended up making $245 per copy. So the pandemic made Andrew Cuomo rich, even as he caused the deaths of innocent people, including Benjamin Smalls, through his cruel negligence. Okay, so sexual misconduct and causing death may be Cuomo's most egregious offenses, but they're not the sum total of them. There's plenty of other evidence that he isn't fit to hold public office. Now, perhaps the most comical of Cuomo's scandal is the story of the Corruption Commission. In 2013, Cuomo announced the formation of the Moreland Commission with the mandate of investigating public corruption. A noble mission by a public servant committed to transparency, you might think, except the commission soon got too close to implicating Andrew Cuomo. 2 months after its formation, its investigators hunting for violations of campaign finance laws issued a subpoena to a media buying firm that had placed millions of dollars worth of advertisements for the New York State Democratic Party, but that firm did advertising work for the governor, and his office called the commission and demanded the commission withdraw the subpoena, which they did. So the governor reportedly deeply compromised the panel's work, objecting whenever the commission focused on groups with ties to Mr. Cuomo, or on issues that might reflect poorly on him. And eventually, the Times-Union says that Cuomo abruptly disbanded the panel after it began probing the governor's allies. Now, it's no surprise that Cuomo didn't want the Corruption Committee to take its task too seriously, given that his administration was a sewer of corruption. For instance, a company called Crystal Run Healthcare donated $400,000 to Cuomo's campaign and soon after received $25 million in grants from the state. Much of that grant money went towards building facilities that the company was already working on, meaning the taxpayer money was essentially being funneled to a private company for no reason. Bill Hammond, director of health policy at the fiscally conservative Empire Center for Public Policy, told the Times-Union why this apparently successful company should be granted such extraordinary support from taxpayers has never been adequately explained. The paper reported that the company tried to spend the funds on eyebrow-raising items, including expensive artwork, 2 $59,000 mood music systems, and an artificial flower arrangement to adorn a lobby. And when the Times-Union filed a FOIA request about the grant, Cuomo's administration redacted almost all financial details from the applications of 2 projects awarded the money. Now, in office, Cuomo operated what was basically a brazen patronage system. The New York Times reports that the State Economic Development Agency created a position and hired a new college graduate with a classics degree to fill it. The young man's father happened to be a lawyer who donated $26,000 to Cuomo's campaigns. The month afterward, the agency hired a 23-year-old with a degree in Assyriology, the study of ancient Mesopotamia, for a job with a $75,000 salary. And shortly before the young Assyriologist started work, his real estate developer father given $25,000 to Cuomo's re-election campaign. And of nearly 50 people hired by the Economic Development Agency during the first 20 months of Cuomo's tenure, according to the New York Times, nearly a third were the governor's political associates, donors, and friends, or their relatives. Cuomo's own right-hand man, Joseph Percoco, was ultimately convicted of soliciting and accepting over $300,000 in bribes from companies doing business with the state, some of which occurred while Percoco was managing Cuomo's re-election campaign. In emails with companies bribing him, Percoco referred to money as ziti, a Sopranos reference. Cuomo was close to Percoco, having once called him my father's third son, but he claimed to know nothing about the corruption and was not charged himself. Nevertheless, the fact that open bribery could flourish so close to Cuomo reveals at least lax standards of ethical oversight. Now, I've so far concentrated on matters that should be objectionable to anyone, regardless of their political views. Lying, harassment, intimidation, and incompetence. These are not left versus right issues. But there is plenty that is objectionable about Cuomo's actual politics, too. When he was first elected, he pursued a decidedly unprogressive agenda, according to city limits, passing austerity budgets, targeting public employee unions, cutting taxes on the wealthy, and going to bat for charter schools. No surprise, then, that Cuomo raked in money from corporate, hedge fund, and real estate interests. And as Politico reported, Cuomo dismissed the idea of raising taxes on the wealthy and introducing a state-level single-payer healthcare program. The Alliance for Quality Education was scathing about Cuomo's record, writing in 2021 that he has, quote, been on a mission to underfund high-need public schools ever since his first year as governor, when he cut over $1 billion from schools while giving a tax break to millionaires. Meanwhile, Cuomo offered Amazon $3 billion in incentives plus a special helipad for Jeff Bezos to locate a headquarters in New York. And Cuomo joked that he would change his name to Amazon Cuomo in order to please the company. Now, when Cuomo did support progressive policies, as he sometimes did, it was largely because outside pressure, especially from labor unions, made him see those policies as being in his political interest. After rejecting a $13 minimum wage as a non-starter, Cuomo quickly flipped and supported a $15 minimum wage when it looked like a political winner. And Bill Lipton, executive director of the Working Families Party, said the truth is Cuomo has no policy or values base at all. What he cares about is keeping taxes low on his donors. Now, Cuomo would take credit for others' initiatives. His chief of staff threatened to end the career of an openly gay state legislator if he did not allow the governor's staff to handle the passage of the legislator's gay marriage bill. You'll never work again. I'll make it my mission in life to destroy you, the legislator recalled him saying in very familiar language here. And one Democratic strategist said Andrew is vindictive, he wants to punish people, and he gets joy out of that. Now, Cuomo is also staunchly pro-Israel, and in 2016 he signed an executive order banning the state from doing business with any company that refuses to do business with Israel. If you boycott against Israel, New York will boycott you, he said. The New York Civil Liberties Union called that measure a blacklist and an unconstitutional affront to free speech. Now, that same year, long before the October 7th attacks and the current war on Gaza, Cuomo said that because Israel's enemy is obsessed, no amount of force it uses could be considered disproportionate. How could you have a disproportionate response when you're dealing with an enemy who's obsessed and single-minded? By definition, you can't be disproportionate, he said. So it's pretty unsurprising then that Cuomo joined Benjamin Netanyahu's legal team to defend the right-wing Israeli leader against war crimes charges at the International Criminal Court. Today, his mayoral campaign is being boosted by donors who support Israel. Now, for years, Cuomo even helped ensure that his own party, the Democratic Party, was kept out of power in the state Senate on purpose. He encouraged an arrangement that allowed the Republicans to remain in leadership even after the election of a Democratic majority. He wanted to guarantee, reportedly, that Republicans had control over the agenda in the Senate so he wouldn't be handing power over to New York City Democrats. He also tried to hobble progressive political power in other ways. After the Working Families Party worked out a deal with Cuomo, getting progressive concessions in exchange for not running a challenger to him on its ballot line, he reneged on those commitments and set out to destroy the party. Journalist Ross Barkan says that an organized progressive wing of the party was terrifying to Cuomo. Now, even on policy, though, I don't think you need to be a leftist or progressive to be critical of Cuomo's record. When I spoke to Barkan several years ago, he's one of New York's top investigative reporters. He's the author of a really excellent and indispensable book on Cuomo, which is called The Prince, Andrew Cuomo, Coronavirus and the Fall of New York. Barkan told me that many people hold an image of Cuomo as this kind of ruthless Machiavellian figure who nevertheless manages to accomplish a great deal. Kind of Robert Moses type figure. But Barkan said this is mythology. He said that Cuomo was not nearly as competent as the reputation would suggest, and the idea was that if he broke a few eggs, he at least made the omelet. But those like Barkan who examined the actual record found the omelets he made were never very good, and he wasn't even good at breaking the eggs in terms of implementing efficient government. Indeed, Bill Samuels, the founder of Effective New York, which advocates for reform in Albany, called Cuomo an old-school political boss who exploits and worsens the most dysfunctional components of New York state politics to make it worse. For instance, Barkan says the New York City subway system deteriorated on Cuomo's watch. The state government is responsible for the Metropolitan Transit Authority that runs the subway, but Cuomo had no interest in it and didn't care that it wasted tons of money, that the signal system wasn't functioning, that trains were becoming badly delayed. And it went beyond the subway. During Cuomo's tenure in office, New York's governance, Barkan says, was horrible, a national laughingstock. The state continued to have worse voter laws than most southern states, including restrictions on absentee and early voting, a deeply incompetent election and administration infrastructure, and a board of elections riddled with patronage, totally a failed body. Now, Ross Barkan says these failings should be laid at the governor's feet, but Cuomo was very good at dodging blame when there's some election snafu or some train delay or something, very good at pretending it was someone else's problem. And you should go back and you should listen to the conversation I did with Ross Barkan where we trace the whole history of Andrew Cuomo's rise in American politics. Now, I could go on and on with examples of Cuomo administration failures and shadiness. There was the policy of deleting state emails after 30 days, which conveniently made sure that if there was evidence of misconduct, it would probably disappear before it was found. That policy was reversed after heavy criticism. There was the water pollution crisis in Hoosick Falls, New York, in which residents were not told there were cancer-causing chemicals in their water supply, and Cuomo administration officials were assuring residents their water was safe when the municipal water supply had already tested at 600 parts per trillion, even though safe consumption levels had been lowered to 100 parts per trillion and then 70 parts per trillion. According to one local doctor, residents were advised incorrectly to consume water that was unsafe for at least 12 months. The list of scandals from Cuomo's time as governor goes well beyond harassment and COVID-19. Now, powerful New York Democrats want to sweep all of these facts under the rug right now. The New York Times reports the state's powerful Democratic establishment now appears more interested in getting back into Cuomo's good graces than in stopping him. Kirsten Gillibrand, known in the Senate as an ally of the Me Too movement, said of Cuomo, "This is a country that believes in second chances."
This is a country that believes in second chances, so it's up to New York voters to decide if he should get a second chance to serve.
What would your recommendation be to those voters?
It's up to New York voters. It's not up to me.
Now, Lindsey Boylan, for one, is disgusted with these Democrats, saying, Lindsey, one of the things that has been very disappointing is that as Andrew Cuomo has campaigned for in this race, there have not been more prominent Democrats coming out and saying, this is
Disgusting.
demented. This is disgusting.
Yeah,
This is how could this person possibly be a contender? I mean,
Yeah, and
there are
I think
a
the
lot
most
of
embarrassing one is Kirsten Gillibrand, just
Well-
because she's built her entire career on, supporting survivors. I just use that example because she's my senator too, and
Yeah.
and she literally made her career off of the backs, essentially, of survivors. And so for her to be silent, like so many others in the party, I think she's afraid of him. She's afraid
Yeah.
of his retaliatory, evil, malicious nature. And while she has a right to be, she also has a responsibility to do her job. And
She's
her
a
job
U.S. senator. I mean, if
her job
anyone
requires
needs
her to
not
have
be afraid.
courage.
Yeah.
These people should have courage
Yeah.
or they should move on. And I think, again, that's why I say this is all really connected to the bigger problems of our country as a whole and frankly the world.
Yeah.
We need people with courage, and this is a great litmus test for that. And so few are having that courage. I mean, I unfortunately have felt over these many years now, kind of like a human shield for many of the people who are much more powerful and much less brave. And that's not me alone. Other women, other leaders who I stand alongside in this fight, and also nursing home victims' families.
Yeah.
But if I can do it, so can they. And
Right. You're not a U.S. senator, you know.
No, I recognize I do have privilege of a platform. You know, I'm a politician and I have a good lawyer and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But if I can do it, so can these really powerful people. And they're choosing not to. And they're choosing not to because they value the certainty and the safety of their jobs. And they feel that Andrew Cuomo can affect that. If that isn't an indictment, not only of them, but also of the kind of evil man that he is, I don't know what is.
Other accusers say they're deeply disappointed by Cuomo's return to politics and feel betrayed by the Democrats who once publicly supported them. Some powerful Democratic groups and individuals have endorsed Cuomo, although most have simply maintained a harmful silence. As of this recording, even Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, despite their fighting oligarchy tour, have yet to endorse Zohran Mamdani or make any effort to help beat Cuomo. Now, what makes all of this especially unconscionable is that Cuomo's election risks doing active harm to people. It's not just that he's unlikely to do anything about inequality in the city and heaps scorn on proposals like Mamdani's plans to reduce the cost of transportation and housing, calling them simply not possible.
Free childcare, free college, everything free. Everything free. Great. You know, I'm for free. How do you pay for it? Oh, you tax the rich. Okay. And why would the rich stay here, by the way, in this socialist city of New York?
It's worse than that, because Cuomo is a sexual harasser. So that means that electing him means exposing every woman in the mayor's office to risk. The Attorney General's report said the pattern of harassment under Cuomo's governorship was enabled and facilitated by a culture within the executive chamber of secrecy, loyalty to the governor, and fear, as well as the normalization of inappropriate comments and interactions by the governor. So we can expect that the toxic culture endemic to his governor's mansion would come to City Hall if Cuomo is made mayor of New York. Furthermore, because Andrew Cuomo has shown that he is corrupt, dishonest, and incompetent, we can expect the mayor's office to be corrupt, dishonest, and incompetent on his watch. Now, like I said, I am not a New Yorker, but I, personally, cannot understand why anyone would vote for this if there was any other option available. And I'm not going to forget Mr. Benjamin Smalls. I'm not going to forgive the man who caused the death of Mr. Smalls. That man has never expressed an ounce of contrition, and that man has repeatedly lied to cover up his misconduct. And to every New York voter out there, I hope you don't forget either. Thanks for watching. This video is a product of Current Affairs Magazine, the country's leading independent left print magazine based here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Go to currentaffairs.org, To find out more about us at currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to our absolutely gorgeous bi-monthly print edition. Get it in your mailbox. You can also subscribe to the Current Affairs News Briefing, the Current Affairs podcast, or you can subscribe to our digital edition. Current Affairs is entirely reader-supported. We have no ads. We have no corporate backers. We depend on you. So please consider purchasing a subscription or making a donation to Current Affairs today. We are a 501c3 non-profit organization, and your donations are tax-deductible to the extent allowable by law. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.